This Krishna consciousness movement that Srila Prabhupada brought to the West is a multi-dimensional impact.
Who was the founder? Who is the one who initiated this? And what was the circumstances in which he did is not sufficiently well known and appreciated by the world.
Arguably the most influential Hindu figure in the West.
That there was a better path, there was a more resounding and a more reassuring path. That path, of course, was with Indian spirituality through the love and devotion of Krishna and in Krishna consciousness.
The academic world of the West is also full of appreciation for Srila Prabhupada's explanation of Bhagavad Gita as well as Srimad Bhagavatam. Though the title is Sing, Dance and Pray, it is coming out of a very deep philosophy.
It is really very timely for us all to read Dr. Sengupta's book, Sing, Dance and Pray, and to learn more about the inspirational life of Srila Prabhupada. We begin this evening's discussion with His Grace Sri Chanchalapati Dasa. He is the Senior Vice President of ISKCON Bangalore and the Vice Chairman of the Akshaya Patra Foundation. He studied at the Indian Institute of Sciences in Bangalore, and it was while he was studying that he came across the message and teachings of Srila Prabhupada. As you can see, the teachings have dramatically transformed his life, and he's now with us today up here. He's been involved in the implementation of various programs of the ISKCON Bangalore group of temples for almost 4 decades. He has also been involved with the Akshaya Patra Foundation as its vice chairman since its inception in the year 2000. We're so happy to have you here, Prabhuji, and we request you to kindly address us.
Namaste and Hare Krishna to all of you. As you saw in the short video introduction, Srila Prabhupada created a significant impact all over the world with the message of Bhagavad Gita. And Srila Prabhupada represented the tradition of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was a saint, philosopher, reformist from Bengal in the 15th century, India. And that's how the title for the book, Sing, Dance and Pray, comes because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu introduced, or rather revitalized, a form of celebratory worship of Krishna. Revitalized in the sense it's already there in the Vedic literatures, in the Vedic histories of praying to Krishna in Sankirtana, chanting the names of Krishna, singing and dancing, that kind of a worship of Krishna. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu popularized that. In fact, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu traveled around in India, in some of the places of learning in our country, like in Varanasi and other places, some of the scholars of his time criticized him that he looks like a sentimentalist, singing and dancing. But then there were occasions when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was called for a serious philosophical discussion. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in fact, engaged in such discussions with impressible erudition of Vedic scriptures, Sanskrit, grammar, logic, and such aspects of Vedic culture. So there was this element of profound scholarship in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's personal life and in his tradition. But there was also the important aspect of singing, chanting, and dancing as part of the spiritual practice. So these two important aspects were very much prevalent in Chaitanya tradition, apart from many other aspects, all rooted in ancient, authentic Vedic culture, like the temple worship and festivals like Rath Yatra. And Srila Prabhupada transplanted all of those different elements of Chaitanya tradition, which is part of the Vedic tradition, on a worldwide movement in modern times. So, Srila Prabhupada brought Sankirtana to the streets of Western countries. He brought festivals of Rath Yatra. He brought temple worship. We have Krishna temples around the world. Srila Prabhupada brought the philosophical discussions, and he himself authored, translated, and wrote commentaries on over 70 books, and set up a translating and publishing division, as you saw in the video clip, which distributed millions of copies of Vedic literature all over the world. And Srila Prabhupada also introduced the vegetarian sattvic cuisine all over the world. Srila Prabhupada was also a great scholar, and in fact, his ability to communicate very profound philosophical truths from the Vedic literatures in simple language and in a way that can be understood and that can actually enrich and benefit people all over the world. That was one of his important contributions to the world. And Srila Prabhupada did all of these things, as we saw, at an advanced age of 69, 70, up to the age of 81. One may wonder, why didn't Srila Prabhupada do all of this earlier? In fact, Srila Prabhupada did make a very serious, systematic attempt for about 35 years, and practically he failed in all of those fronts. And as a last attempt, he wanted to make a visit to America and make one final attempt, and which actually blossomed into a worldwide organization like ISKCON. This is the story of Srila Prabhupada, and it was last year we were observing the 125th birth anniversary of Srila Prabhupada, and we thought that from ISKCON Bangalore it's an appropriate initiative that we make Srila Prabhupada, his message, his life, his contributions, his impact known to more people all over the world. Because the impact that he created, the Hare Krishna movement, the books of Bhagavad Gita, the chanting of the holy name, in the streets of the Western countries and the Ratha Yatra festivals is to a certain extent well known. But who was the founder? Who is the one who initiated this? And what was the circumstances in which he did? Is not sufficiently well known and appreciated by the world. Lot of biographies of Srila Prabhupada have been already written by ISKCON devotees, and they are mostly for ISKCON devotees. So it was at that time we had about 3 years ago, we were in conversation with Penguin publishers in India, and it was at that time Penguin recommended Dr. Hindol Sengupta to play the role of writing and presenting the life story of Srila Prabhupada. And that's how Dr. Hindol Sengupta got involved, and he did about 18 months of research and reading of the different books that were already published, and being a historian about the context and the circumstances in India and in America and the rest of the world, which shaped the development of Prabhupada and his activities. And that's how we have the book Sing, Dance and Pray, and it's very heartening to share with all of you. In less than 6 months, the book became a national bestseller back in India. And so we wanted to further present the message and the life of Srila Prabhupada with the people of United Kingdom, and that's how we are here last 8 days, and today we are here in Cambridge, and we are very happy that all of you are here with us to share the excitement that we feel to tell the story of Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Your Grace. Dr. Hindol Sengupta, author and historian who wrote Sing, Dance and Pray, is also a multiple award-winning author of 10 books. He has been a Chevening Scholar at Oxford, a Knight Baggot Fellow at Columbia University, and has a doctorate in international relations from the Geneva School of Diplomacy. He has been a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. He's Chief Economic Research Officer at Invest India, the national investment promotion agency of the Government of India. I now invite Dr. Hindol Sengupta to kindly share his thoughts with us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really delighted and honored that all of you have gathered here today, and thank you to His Graces for this wonderful occasion and a perfect setting at the Old Divinity School at St. John's. I have been fascinated for a long time by the history of how Hinduism spread around the world, who were the key people who contributed to that spread, and why they did what they did, what impact they had, and what are the remaining legacies or the continuing legacies of the work that they did. Some of my early work, of course, was with Swami Vivekananda, but Srila Prabhupada is a very interesting and a unique character in this story. Srila Prabhupada's impact while he lived only 10 years between the age of 70 and 80, that he worked in America and in other parts of the world, landing in America only at the age of 69, he managed to create 108 temples around the world. And if you think about Srila Prabhupada as, in a sense, a messenger of the Vaishnavite tradition of Hinduism, he had a unique voice in many of the debates that he was part of. Certainly in the anti-Vietnam War protest, which was one of the main places where he worked, Srila Prabhupada made a useful and a unique contribution. Srila Prabhupada worked, his early years, he worked with the hippies of New York in the middle of the anti-Vietnam War protests. explaining to the hippies of New York that there was a better path, there was a more resounding and a more reassuring path to the rebellion that they were part of. And that path, of course, was with Indian spirituality through the love and devotion of Krishna and in Krishna consciousness. This, of course, spread not just in America, and Srila Prabhupada, from New York, it spread to San Francisco and in other parts of America. Then it spread to this country, where Srila Prabhupada found a very devoted and devout disciple in George Harrison. And the Maha Mantra that was mentioned in the video actually became a best-selling record. In the tradition of the Beatles, who used to record these incredible records at that time, became a global best-selling record. So Srila Prabhupada used many of the tools and many of the ideas that were available to him in terms of communication to build space for the ideas of the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition of Hinduism around the world. There are other elements of Srila Prabhupada's intervention that I think are particularly keen. One of them, which we think, or at least I think, is particularly useful to try and understand today, is his emphasis on feeding people, feeding the hungry. One of the great programs that have come out of the Krishna consciousness movement is the Akshaya Patra program, which has served 3 billion meals to school-going students in India, and is fast reaching 1 million meals in the UK. Now, at the time when Srila Prabhupada, started this entire campaign that no person can ever go hungry, and in a sense, the entire idea of trying to discover a deeper divinity, a deeper source of solace in divinity can only be possible once a human being receives basic sustenance, and food is a fundamental part of it. Now, the interesting thing is that in his time, one would have thought that this idea would be, is a classic Eastern idea. It comes from the poorer parts of the world. It comes from India and other parts of the world, which are the poorer parts of the world. Today, hunger is a global problem, and, the East and West, in a sense, have collapsed on issues like hunger. And in New York, across America, in the UK, the problem of hunger is ever rising. And the work therefore, of organizations like Akshaya Patra are more important than ever before, because as global hunger rises, as poverty rises, as inequality rises, there are many responses that will come to these problems. And one of the great interventions that organizations like the Krishna consciousness movement can do is to showcase what the role of spiritual organizations or spiritual, religious or spiritual organizations who have a particular response to these problems, they can showcase how they can make an intervention. I did some work with advising with a group of other, academics and scholars with the WHO, which spoke about how faith-based organizations during the COVID crisis can play a role, and how they play a role in different communities, what their response could be, how they could alleviate the problem. Now, interestingly, when I was doing that work, I was simultaneously writing this book, and I chanced upon this wonderful, piece of information from old Bengali newspapers that, in the time of Srila Prabhupada, Bengal used to be afflicted by plagues. And after many such plague, attacks in the city of Calcutta, bands of Vaishnavite sadhus would actually be singing and dancing as the first line of people who would come out on the streets to tell the general population that it was safe now to come out onto the streets. And of course, these dancing and singing bands of monks in the Vaishnavite tradition were only replicating what had been started by Sri Chaitanya. In terms of singing and dancing, monks, talking about the message of the love of Sri Krishna. But they were at the front lines of, giving a response to a health crisis all those years ago. And when we were doing this work, we realized that many faith-based organizations today play a frontline role in alleviating such crises, and the work of Akshay Patra in delivering millions and millions of meals around the world, which is ever growing, shows us that the role that spiritual organizations can actually have in confronting some of our deepest and some of our most protracted problems that are not going away, problems which are increasing as inequality increases around the world, and problems which will be with us perhaps for a long time. Certainly the demand for this kind of response is ever growing. The other great and interesting thing about Srila Prabhupada, of course, is he had very little time in which he did his work. But there was an afterlife of Srila Prabhupada, because of course the Krishna consciousness movement grew and expanded around the world. Srila Prabhupada actually, if you think about it, is the first truly global faith-based organization that comes out of India. Because Srila Prabhupada's first disciples were not Indians. Most of them were not Indians. Most of Srila Prabhupada's first disciples and core disciples were all foreigners, many of them Americans and others. And these were the people who, in fact, embraced a spiritual, a faith-based ideology from Srila Prabhupada, who taught them from the very grassroots of, how to live their lives, how to wash their hands, how to conduct, rituals like worshipping a vigraha or a deity, how to do puja, and so on and so forth, right up to the grand Rath Yatras that Srila Prabhupada organized in the middle of the flower power music festivals in San Francisco. In the middle of all of that in San Francisco, Srila Prabhupada, of course, brought in the Rath Yatra of Jagannath Puri, which is quite an incredible thing. There are wonderful videos about this. Also, Srila Prabhupada, because his very early disciples were not Indian, also managed to attract a very interesting kind of people as his disciples. I'm thinking, of course, of Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg and William Buckley Jr. had some of the most interesting debates on the Vietnam War, televised across America in the height of the Vietnam War. Now, in one of those debates, Allen Ginsberg actually takes out a little harmonium from under the seat and begins to sing the Maha Mantra as a response to what he feels the sheer doggedness of William Buckley Jr. not understanding why the anti-Vietnam War protests exist, and why there is a rejection by so many young people in America at that time of the military-industrial complex. That's quite an incredible cultural moment, and I think that cultural moment, which played out in American screens, has been forgotten. Certainly in India it's been forgotten. I'm sure in America also not too many people remember it. In the UK, of course, Srila Prabhupada found one of his closest disciples in George Harrison. And George Harrison was at the peak of his powers as a frontline Beatles member. George Harrison, of course, bought the estate that later became the Bhaktivedanta Manor. George Harrison not only spoke about how he had been disillusioned even before he met Srila Prabhupada by all the fame and money that they had received as young boys really, and how he was looking for something more, and he seems to have found that something more with Srila Prabhupada in Krishna consciousness. George Harrison remained closely associated with Srila Prabhupada all his life, and it is because of the influence of George Harrison and what was happening in music at that time that the Maha Mantra record, in a sense, was created and cut. So Srila Prabhupada, is one of those wonderful figures who takes on the West, takes on the ideas of the West, and uses Western people to really build a global movement. A non-sectarian global movement. Please remember, Srila Prabhupada did not, highlight or emphasize the fact that his message was, only Hindu, so to speak. I mean, he spoke about, the universality of the idea of Krishna, the idea of God, how that could appeal to anybody from anywhere in the world, including saying and suggesting that if somebody had an objection to the word Krishna, they could, use whatever name of God that they preferred, but as long as they were devoted to chanting that name, chanting was very important in his, way of communication with the divine and, embracing the divine. And therefore, this sort of non-sectarianness helped him build a movement that stretched in his own lifetime from New York all the way to Australia, to even to Africa, of course, most of Europe, England, and of course, finally also in India. So Srila Prabhupada really, I think, needs a lot more work. And I hope this book will be the beginning of, much more work on Srila Prabhupada and what he stood for, what he how we should look at him historically, how we should look at him in the history of the spread of Indian spirituality around the world, and certainly how we should look at him as somebody who used some of the most cutting edge at that time communication tools to convey not just what he felt was the spiritual facts, not just spiritual ideas, but also, as I emphasized, as a response to the problems that he saw around him. And in his time, the problems were, of course, acute poverty, the problems were inequality, as they continue even today. And the problem was this rejection across the West at that time of the military-industrial complex. Now, all of this makes Srila Prabhupada a very interesting sort of, intersection, where we could look at how all of these issues played out in the role of an elderly Indian man who only arrived in New York after 2 heart attacks at the age of 69. So there are all these wonderful things happening in Srila Prabhupada's life, and I'm very fortunate that I got an opportunity to look at his life more closely. I certainly hope that this book will be the beginning. Sing, Dance and Pray will be the beginning of many such inquiries and adventures into trying to understand what Srila Prabhupada stood for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hindol Sengupta ji, for sharing with us why Srila Prabhupada's work and message resonated for you in writing this book. Professor Sriya Iyer received a PhD from the University of Cambridge. Professor Sriya Iyer serves on the Council of the Royal Economic Society. She serves as a research fellow, CEPR. She's also serving as a research fellow for the IZA and the India Advisory Board Pew Research Center. She was awarded a University of Cambridge Pilkington Prize for Teaching Excellence in 2014. We're so delighted to have you here, Professor, and I now invite you to kindly come and share a few words with us this evening.
So, namaskaram. His Grace Madhupanditdasa, His Grace Chanchalapati Dasa, Dr. Sengupta, friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for the very kind invitation to speak at this event in Cambridge to launch Dr. Hindol Sengupta's book, Sing, Dance and Pray, which provides the very inspirational story of Srila Prabhupada. It is a real honor and a pleasure to be here. As Dr. Sengupta points out in his book, no matter which way we look at it, it is impossible to deny that after Swami Vivekananda in the 1890s, arguably the most influential Hindu figure in the West in the 1960s was Srila Prabhupada, and his spiritual achievement of establishing more than 100 Krishna temples in about a decade was truly remarkable. A few weeks ago, when Navina Nirada Dasa and Kalakanta Dasa came to see me, I learned a great deal more about the Akshaya Patra Foundation, which was inspired by Srila Prabhupada's vision that no one within a radius of 10 miles from one of their centers should go hungry. Consequently, the Akshaya Patra Foundation began its service in India in 2000, and has really made great strides since then to reduce hunger in the classroom by providing children with midday meals and using both technology and philanthropy to motivate that as well. Learning more about the work of the Akshay Patra Foundation resonated very much with me as well, because here in Cambridge, we've been doing a lot of research in the economics of religion, and there are many areas of work that we've been doing here that have relevance to the work of the foundation. For example, in some of the research which I and some of my PhD students have been conducting on the economics of religion in India, we argue that while India has a multiplicity of religions which have proven extraordinarily resilient, there is comparatively little research on the economics of Hinduism. Since the late 1980s and early 1990s, though, we have actually seen the salience of Hinduism in general, which has also been coincident with the period of higher economic growth. In some of our work, based on an analysis of World Value Survey data, we have shown that people in India are very religious. They attend places of worship reasonably often, although actually religious attendance at 25% is much lower than religious beliefs, which is over 90%. People firmly believe in the existence of God and do not feel that religion should be used for ends other than the purely spiritual. Another theme that we've been thinking about is how religious organizations increase their membership through innovations to religion and by providing both religious and non-religious welfare services. Of course, for some religions, providing social services may simply be a moral end in itself. But for those religious groups who do provide welfare services, I think this emphasizes the social as well as the economic aspects of religious communities, as well as purely the effect of religious faith. And to look into some of these issues, some researchers here have conducted a large-scale economic survey of about 600 Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jain, and Sikh religious institutions in India between 2006 and 2010. Chandra is one of them. And we found that propagation of the faith and religious education are considered the two most important activities provided by religious organizations. The most common welfare services provided are education, health, food distribution, employment, childcare, and other services. And just to give you an example of some of these welfare services, they are things like English language education and computer classes for younger devotees, book distribution, sari distribution, flood relief, blood donation, and other medical camps, very innovative microfinance and cow lending schemes to deal with adverse income shocks. And it was here that we also found that about 60% of the Hindu organizations in our sample provided food distribution. And this, of course, resonates extremely well with the excellent work which the Akshay Patra Foundation is doing in this respect. Our economic study also showed that all religious organizations in general provide more education and health services in response to changes in inequality in the Indian economy, something which Hindol just spoke about as well. Other more recent work that we've been doing here in Cambridge has also been exploring the connections between religion and mental health in the United States and religion and mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here, in this type of research, we show that religious membership is positively associated with life satisfaction by about 10% and is highly significant even after controlling for other factors such as the frequency of prayer, service attendance, religiosity, and a belief in God. Religious communities are also acting very effectively by creating social capital, and religiosity also acts as a coping or a meaning-making device, religion essentially offering a form of stress buffer. In fact, in research on the United States, we did investigate this and showed that religiosity, it does in fact affect depression. Using a nationally representative sample of about 20,000 adolescents in the US who were between the grades of 7 and 12, with information both on their school and home environment, we essentially showed that a 1 standard deviation increase in religiosity decreases the probability of being depressed by 11%. What does a 1 standard deviation increase in religiosity mean in plain English? It means that if you go to a place of worship at least once a week, This decreases the probability in this sample of these adolescents being depressed by about 11%, which is very significant. More depressed individuals were also shown to benefit significantly more from religiosity than the least depressed. And our most recent work in the United States has been looking at the relationship between religion and depression during the COVID pandemic. And again here, what we're finding is that religious people have a lower depression score than the non-religious, but that lockdowns negated any religious advantage in mental health, probably because of the lack of access to in-person religious services. Hence, some of the research that we've been doing both in India and in the US is showing that access to religion might have implication for access to public goods, such as education and food distribution, and that religiosity also has the ability to affect mental health and well-being. Hence, I think it is really very timely for us all to read Dr. Sengupta's book, Sing, Dance and Pray, and to learn more about the inspirational life of Srila Prabhupada, to understand better the wider interactions between religious faith, welfare service provision, and well-being more generally. Once again, please let me congratulate Dr. Sengupta on his book and the Akshay Patra Foundation for their really excellent work, both in India, in the UK, and elsewhere. Thank you very much for listening, and Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Professor Sriya. Numbers always help us read how insight becomes action, and so it was deeply insightful to hear all the facts that you presented to us today. Thank you so much. His Grace Sri Madhupandit Dasa is not just a spiritual leader, but also the president of ISKCON Bangalore. He is the founder and chairman of the Akshay Patra Foundation, guiding the organization to realize the vision, no child in India shall be deprived of education because of hunger. His Grace Sri Madhupandit Dasa joined the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, soon after his studies at the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Later, he received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from IIT Bombay. The Government of India has conferred upon him the prestigious Padma Shri Award in recognition of the distinguished service rendered by Akshay Patra Foundation for the children of India. I now invite His Grace Madhupandit Dasa to kindly speak to us.
Friends assembled here, we consider it a great opportunity for being able to release Sing, Dance and Pray at this prestigious Cambridge University. Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, you already heard about his struggle in India, and then how after coming to West, he received great success from the people of the West embracing what he had to say. The message of Bhagavad Gita that Srila Prabhupada brought to the West was a very personalistic message. Till then, till Prabhupada came to the West, Swami Vivekananda was there as a prominent figure who came from the East to the West. And the West got exposed to the monistic philosophy of the Vedas. That ultimately the absolute truth is not a person. It's an impersonal called Brahman. This is, and the West always thought, after Swami Vivekananda came to West, that this is the philosophy of India. However, a very major aspect of Vedanta was also the personalistic philosophy, where the absolute truth is a person. And in that context of absolute truth being a person, who are we? We are sourced from him, we are his part and parcel. So there is a whole is a complete whole, and there is part and parcel. When you add personality to this, there is a complete whole person, and then we are part and parcel persons. So this dualistic philosophy, in contrast to monistic philosophy, not exactly dualistic, we are of the same quality of God, but we are tiny living entities, and God is a supreme living entity. And that is a real message of Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada, if you take ISKCON's Bhagavad Gita, you will see Bhagavad Gita as it is. Whatever Krishna says, direct meaning is assigned to it. Krishna tells Arjuna, you surrender to me. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham tam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma suchaha. This is, everybody agrees that this is the essence of Bhagavad Gita, the last in 18th chapter, 66th verse. This is the essence of Bhagavad Gita. But monistic philosophy has one interpretation. They say that you have to merge with God, you merge with Krishna, because ultimately there is no personality in the absolute truth. Anything that is connected with personality, there is an understanding that this is an illusion and this is a maya. But the personalistic philosophy that Srila Prabhupada took, the Vaishnava philosophy that Srila Prabhupada brought from the east to the west, represented by great acharyas like Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whereas the monistic philosophy was from Shankaracharya. So the West got a taste of personalism, absolute personalism, bhakti, love of God, all these things in an absolute platter. They received it. Till then, they have a different understanding of even Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga, according to the impersonal philosophy, is simply a path to merge into God. Whereas Vaishnava philosophy, it says, yeah, there is an eternal world, a real eternal world. And this world is a reflection of that world. And this gave a completely different meaning of who I am. Whereas in the two philosophies, who I am comes out differently. Who I am in Krishna conscious philosophy, we are all children of the Supreme Father, one Supreme Father. So that is how this philosophy of Krishna consciousness brings about compassion to fellow human being as creating an impetus to serve each one, each other as with common brotherhood, and Supreme Father is one. So it may sound like Christian philosophy, but actually this is completely Prabhupada brought about this Krishna consciousness and explained that even though God is a person, but he is an unlimited person. He is Satchid Ananda. These bodily forms that we have here are perverted reflections of the real. We have real Satchidananda Vigraha. God has a form, God has a name, God has a Leela, God has pastimes, has relationship with us. That world, there is a world called Vaikunta. All these things have been completely absorbed by the West. which normally looks like mythology, but Prabhupada presented it's not mythology, it is a higher dimensional truth. God has got two aspects, the immanent aspect and the transcendental aspect. So immanent, God, the Krishna conscious philosophy explained to us, gives a world view where one can understand what is suffering, why we suffer, what is laws of karma, why the law of karma, what is this world, what is birth, what is death, what is old age, what is disease, what is the meaning of life, what are we all going through, where did we come from, where are we going afterward. He gave answers to all these things from the personalistic point of view, from the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, from the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, from the philosophy of Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada translated Bhagavad Gita and translated Bhagavatam. He extensively spent all his in terms of establishing this philosophy, he touched upon most of the time Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. Because Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Upanishads. And Bhagavatam is the essence of the entire Vedic theism. So he dwelled on these two things, and in fact, Prabhupada's 75 books that he wrote is all largely Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and of course then Chaitanya's teachings. So today the West, West has been gifted with English translations, beautiful English translations of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya philosophy, so that anybody who really wants to inquire about what is the absolute truth, they get another equally probable, as far as the philosophical world is concerned, the personalism is as important interpretation of Vedanta as is the impersonal. So this is a very significant contribution to the even to the academic world. The academic world of the West is also full of appreciation for Srila Prabhupada's explanation of Bhagavad Gita as well as Srimad Bhagavatam. So coming to, because a lot of things were spoken about, sing, dance, pray, and as Chanchalapati Prabhu told, that when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to Benares, when he was singing, dancing, and in the streets of Benares, the great sannyasis who were always studying Vedanta, they said, oh, what silly sannyasi, he should be reading Vedanta, he should be talking knowledge about Brahman. Why is he dancing like this, sannyasi? So like that, they used to criticize him. So in the same way, we should understand that though the title is Sing, Dance and Pray, it is coming out of a very deep philosophy from India, the Vaishnavism, that to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And how to practice it, and that's another gift of Srila Prabhupada. That how by associating with the name of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, it can impact our tiny consciousness. We are all having tiny consciousness. You have your consciousness, you have your consciousness, you are aware of your body, you are aware of your body, he is aware of, each one is aware of our body. But Bhagavad Gita says there is one consciousness who is aware of all the bodies. And that is a person. And that person is Paramatma. So how Bhakti Yoga is about actually living with Krishna, with God, with Paramatma in the heart. So it's a very practical philosophy. It is a very, it is not simply an armchair philosophy. It brings forth compassionate action for the suffering humanity. Even though we know that everyone's suffering is due to their karma, as per our worldview, Still, it is each of our duty for our own evolution of our own consciousness. We practice compassion like Akshay Patra, trying to feed the hungry children all over the world. We have not only in India, even in London, we have started kitchen. It's newly started, and we are feeding the children as well as homeless here. So in other words, this Krishna consciousness movement that Srila Prabhupada brought to the West is a very, it's a multi-dimensional impact it has got, philosophical for the academic world, practical service to the community, it's food for life, it's as Prabhupada as explained, no one should go within 10-mile radius of ISKCON center. Should go hungry. This was a mandate given by Srila Prabhupada to all of us, and that is being fulfilled. This brings about a social dimension to this movement. And then most important thing, again, it is not, Swami Vivekananda came and he gave the philosophy of monism, but Srila Prabhupada gave the philosophy of Vaishnavism, not only philosophy, he planted the culture of India in the Westerners. Because this culture of the Vedic culture is very much connected to practicing of these tenets of personalism. So that is also another very important contribution of Srila Prabhupada. He didn't just leave it to philosophy. That is why you see now in the Western world, devotees, Westerners are shaved up, having shikha, having tilak, and fully, as per the Indian tradition, culture, festivals, following Ekadashi, following, all this, everything they have adopted. Not just the philosophy, they adopted that way of life too. With these few little Prabhupada's, what he has done is unbelievable, and Prabhupada always gave credit to Lord Krishna, that everything was Krishna's power, that he could bring Krishna into the people of the West. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Your Grace, for shining light on the philosophical scope of Srila Prabhupada's work. If you have any questions or comments that you would like to pose to any of our speakers or all of them, then the floor is yours. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much. Both of you started an amazing mission like Akshay Patra in India. So what were the major challenges that you faced during last 2 decades? Because it's not gonna easy in India to cater people and provide meals at schools.
20 years, 23 years to be precise, is indeed a long time. And we have had different kinds of challenges that we have gone through. Of course, one constant challenge has been funds. Akshaya Patra works with the government for the school meal program. The government of India has a very large, in fact, the world's biggest school meal program. And so there is a certain amount of money the government of India and the state governments provide an NGO like Akshaya Patra to carry out that program. But that money is inadequate to actually give a wholesome, nutritious, safe, tasty meal to children every day. It only, in our terms, it only covers about 50 or 55% of the cost. And so we have another 45% of the cost of the meal to be raised. As on date, today we are serving 2.3 million children every day in 67 locations in our country. And so 2.3 million children, 2.3 million meals, multiplied by about 7 rupees per meal is what we have to raise over and above the 7 rupees that the government gives us. The cost of the meal is about 15 rupees. So you can imagine that there is a significant effort that has to go into the raising of the money. In fact, Akshaya Patra has no corpus, has no endowed funds. We raise money every year and we spend all of that money. And so the corpus of Akshaya Patra is actually the goodwill of people. So people in India and people all over the world have been contributing, and that is what has enabled us to continuously maintain this program. And we have about another 10 or 12 kitchens in the pipeline in the next 1 year or so. And we are likely to touch about 2.5 million children feeding in the next 1 or 2 years. So, Akshaya Patra is not only getting all the raw materials, converting into food safely and transporting them, delivering them in the schools, in about 10,000 schools all over the country, and feeding the children. There is one more important aspect of Akshaya Patra: to continuously raise money. And as we saw in the life of Srila Prabhupada encouraged us to use all aspects of modernization, technology, management, good practices that are there in the secular for-profit world to be used for charitable activities. And so we have good principles of governance, financial disclosures, use of technology, use of good management practices. All of these things folded into the work of Akshaya Patra. And that's how we have been, one of the important things we do is digital marketing and fundraising on the net. And this is one of the important streams of fundraising. So, this is one challenge. Another challenge sometimes we have come across is that when Akshaya Patra steps in to provide meals, formerly there were some other arrangement, and that arrangement gets disrupted when we step in. And so those people who were involved in the former arrangement, for certain reasons that they were also interested in that program, become very unhappy that we are coming in. And some of them have some political links and try to obstruct us. So we have had those kind of challenges. But our experience is that although maybe different challenges exist, but at the end of the day, we are providing a good meal to a child in different parts of India. And that meal is delightful for the child. It brings a smile on the face of the child. And children wait for that meal. In fact, many times it happens. The children are in the classroom and they're waiting for this Akshaya Patra vehicle to drive into their school premises, and children eagerly run out of the classroom and line up to receive a meal. So that's very heartening, and that has been very, very inspiring and motivating for us despite different challenges that exist.
Akshaya Patra has been running for the past 20 years, 23 years, and he has explained how we do not have any corpus. So how Akshaya Patra is running? Simply by Lord Krishna's mercy. It's a demonstration of Krishna conscious philosophy. Not 1 month it has got disrupted due to shortage of funds. Even though shortage funds is a challenge, but we have always succeeded. God helps those who help themselves. This Akshaya Patra story is that. Anybody we tell that we are feeding 2.3 million children every day, the first question anybody would ask is, how much reserve fund do you have? We say, we have nothing. For next month, we collect this month. And in this way, it is sustained. Because it depends, ultimately our dependence is on the goodwill of the people, on the compassionate, everybody is internally, every human being has got this quality of compassion. So it's our effort is just to go and tell the people that there are hungry children like that. Let us be between you and those children. You are feeding them. So in this way, we have, by Lord Krishna's continuous help, so Akshaya Patra is also a story of how we are actually applying Krishna consciousness.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Hare Krishna. So my question is to Dr. Sen Gupta. Sir, as you mentioned that Srila Prabhupada, he is we can consider him as this most influential Hindu figure in West after Swami Vivekananda. So what differences and similarities you find in the work of Srila Prabhupada when compared with Swami Vivekananda?
I think some of the philosophical differences, as far as their approach to philosophy is concerned, I think His Grace Madhupandit Prabhu has just explained in detail, so I shall not repeat that. That's already done. Let me take a look at let me answer your question through a sort of a historical perspective. There are a few things, which are unmistakable when we look at their journeys. One, of course, is obviously the most obvious is that they both, of course, arrived in America, right? Their land where they were able to have the greatest impact at the very beginning was America. Now, we could, spend the whole evening unpacking why America. There are many, some obvious, some not so obvious reasons. It's also important to note that both Srila Prabhupada and Vivekananda arrive in America at a particular historical juncture. If you look at Vivekananda, Vivekananda was actually told that in Boston that if you had come and told all these things to us even 40 years ago, we would have hung you from the nearest tree, right? So, but America was ready for that message. I would argue that when Srila Prabhupada arrived in New York and spoke to the hippies and spoke to all these people, and not just the hippies, when, Allen Ginsberg got inspired by Srila Prabhupada's message, not only was his message really powerful, but it was also a particular moment in America's history. I mentioned in my brief comments that there was a huge rejection of what we today could know as the military-industrial complex within large parts of American society. And indeed, Srila Prabhupada's message was that there was a better path away from what many of these young men and women were rejecting. That path was not to submit to this sort of capitalistic machine, so to speak, but to really offer your life in service. Service to what? Service to a higher cause, service to the divine, service to God. Now, again, I mentioned briefly, he had to work very hard with many of his disciples, early disciples, to teach them the very basics of life, including wash your hands before you eat. And not a laughing matter, the next one. If you cannot practice chastity, which is, of course, held deeply, valued in Indian spirituality, please try and be faithful to one partner. Now, you can understand, both from a historical perspective, also from a medicinal historical perspective, how important this message would have been. Also remember, this was an era when people like Timothy Leary and others were experimenting with an alternative universe, rejecting, the military-industrial complex, with LSD and others, Timothy Leary at Harvard and so on and so forth, who also, by the way, later on landed up, you'll see in my book, later on landed up in India, and that's another story altogether. But Srila Prabhupada, as I say in my book, some of the leaflets they published said that there was a better high than the high that these young men and women were seeking. And the greater high, as it were, was of Krishna. And one clever, devotee, obviously, wrote that, from any other high, you have to come down. But from the high of Krishna, you would never have to come down. Which I think is a really, really, interesting, clever intervention in the dialogue that these people are having with society, right? And that obviously worked. I mentioned his use of communication, including deciding to cut a record label. Once the Beatles were familiar and George Harrison had become part of the Krishna consciousness movement. So Vivekananda himself, remember, and this is important, we often talk in terms of Vivekananda accessing the West, but we forget that Vivekananda's first disciples, and there's a distinction here, or followers or supporters, whatever you want to call them, were often from the elite of American society. Remember, the person who wrote a letter for Vivekananda to go to the Parliament of Religions was a professor at Harvard, right? But Srila Prabhupada, and class is unavoidable, as we're at Cambridge, surely I don't have to explain to anyone here that class is inevitable as part of every story. The first disciples of Srila Prabhupada were really from very, very, very economically, poor backgrounds. Many of them really didn't have much at all. They were young men and women who had, in a sense, lost their way and were trying to rediscover some sort of, existence. So that difference we cannot avoid. That doesn't mean that they were the only people who were impressed by Srila Prabhupada's message. I mentioned Ginsberg and then Harrison and many others. And in fact, there were professors who later supported Srila Prabhupada in various ways and so on and so forth. But these fundamental differences are unavoidable. I have to mention one more thing that's very obvious, but it's important to highlight. Vivekananda was a very young man when he went to America. Srila Prabhupada was an extremely old man, or a relatively old man, when he went to America, right? And there's obviously a difference in that. The other thing, of course, is that Vivekananda spent a relatively short period of time and then went back to India to build his movement. Whereas Srila Prabhupada spent most of his last decade in the West. Of course, he kept going back to India and so on and so forth. And in his last days, of course, he was in India. But he spent a lot of time in the West. Right? So in a sense, his primary karma bhumi in building the Krishna consciousness movement in this scale was really the West, not India. So these differences, and of course each of them and differences that I mentioned, we can, elaborately unpack, but we don't have time for that. But it's important to note at least at the moment these differences.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. So I think my question is more about the principle of Krishna consciousness being propagated amongst the younger generation. So I am a very firm believer of Krishna consciousness. Whenever I'm back home in India, I spend days in ISKCON Bangalore. But I think this is one part of me that a lot of my friends or colleagues just don't understand, because, religion for them is something that, or spirituality is something that dawns at a later age. But then when I get really excited about things like going to Guruvayur or, going to ISKCON, they don't really understand that. So I'm just wondering what you have to say about making Krishna consciousness a more of a home to the younger generation and not just, older people.
Krishna consciousness is really, if you see the reality, whether it is youngsters, old people, families, or men, women, it embraces everyone. Opportunity is there for everyone. In fact, when Prabhupada began, most of the people were youngsters. So it was a movement of youngsters. Prabhupada was 70 years old, but all the people who helped him build the movement, they were all youngsters. So Krishna consciousness is for the soul. So that is seen in the ISKCON movement. If you are having anything particular that the current ISKCON is, too much focused on, let's say you can say, if you are thinking that the idea of ISKCON when it comes to you is full-time missionaries like us. No, ISKCON is a movement. There are hundreds and thousands of people outside who are chanting and practicing Krishna consciousness in their life. And we are just the priests, or we are just the preachers who they come and associate with us. But there are millions who are practicing in their homes. Okay?
I'll just add one point to your question. In fact, when, as Madhu Pandit Prabhu mentioned, Srila Prabhupada had lot of followers and they were all young people. In fact, in one of the university programs in America, one reporter asked Prabhupada the question, why is it that you have all young people who are your followers? And Prabhupada looked at the students in the university in that gathering and he said, in the university, why do you have only young people? Because young people can learn, old people cannot learn, normally speaking. So it's an age for learning, and so we do have a lot of young followers because at that young age they are open, they are inquisitive, they're looking for an understanding about life, and it's a very mentally, intellectually, in a very fertile framework to understand deep philosophical insights.
Hare Krishna. Congratulations, Dr. Sengupta, on the launch. Just following on your point earlier about Srila Prabhupada's message being at the right time, at the right place, right location, in the right way. I was wondering whether there were more recent confluence of events, circumstances which have been pivotal in raising collective consciousness. Maybe Professor Iyer as well, from your research, whether there are emerging confluences that can really elevate collective consciousness from where we are today.
No, I actually, for instance, found the research that Shriyaji presented fascinating, and I hope to have a deeper conversation with her about this research afterwards, because it absolutely validates many of the things I think we are seeing around the world. There are 3 or 4 things that, we talk about which are very, very important. We are collectively heading towards a crisis. That's no surprise to anybody. Climate change, inequality. In India, for instance, there is grave concern that as climate change helps the, waters to rise around our peripheries, so to speak, from our neighbors like Bangladesh and other parts, there could be, in our lifetime, a mass exodus of people who would have no choice but to flee. Where would those people go? Now, these concerns and many others are creating and, had already created a deep fissure in society. Artificial intelligence is going to add to all of this. We are sitting on a day when, election results have been announced in India in many parts, and you will see many of the themes that are coming up again and again in elections in India and other parts of the world is basic insecurity. And that basic insecurity we are seeing reflected also, not just in mental health, as was pointed out today, but also in a large part of people increasingly calling themselves SBNR. Every time I go to America, friends of mine and others say they are SBNR, they are spiritual but not religious. Now, of course, they, as the lady here pointed out, they may have some reservations of calling themselves religious, but there is no doubt that people are seeking something that would provide them solace. Whatever terminology, nomenclature you may wish to use, there is no doubt that people seek a better way of living and solace. Now, how soon can people find it? Will enough people find it for us to stave off some of the crisis that is approaching us? Obviously, we don't know that. But certainly, for in all my work, in all my books, as I've toured around the world, increasing numbers of people who come to it, even my book releases, are younger people. I must complete something that His Grace was saying. I asked one of the young ISKCON monks, ISKCON Bangalore monks, when I began this process, how did you become a monk? And he's younger than me. He's much younger than me. He must be in his late 20s. And he said, I used to love dancing. And, I used to go here, there. And one day somebody said, there's a lot of dancing in this temple. And I said, what would you mean? How strange is that? But he said, no, you must go and see. So I went and I saw all these monks dancing. And I said, wow, this is very cool. So, people find different points to approach the same thing. Obviously, once he got in through this, this perspective, he learned, more deeply about the philosophy and everything else, and it changed his life. But there are entry points. And I fear that we are not being able to give people enough entry points for them to access the solace that they seek. Now, one is always skeptical of saying something like this because it can easily be misunderstood as, propagating dogma of some sort. But that's not true. I think human beings truly seek, and I always argue this in many places that I go. If you think about it, in our lifetime is perhaps the first time in human history where a large number of people don't have an access to an inner life. If you think your parents' generation also, they would go to a church on Sunday. Somebody would go to a mosque on a particular day. Somebody would go fast on one day, go to the temple another day. I remember back in Calcutta where I grew up, whatever else people did, while going to office, there would be a neighborhood temple. They would quickly go in for a couple of minutes and then go out. This entire access to something beyond material life, we have completely stopped. And we have made it, quote unquote, unfashionable. But, actually it's come back to fashion. More and more people are seeking this than ever before. And I think that this hunger is a very important, access point to that solace that people seek. Ma'am, could you?
Thank you very much for your question. I think what I would contribute as somebody who's doing some research in this area is really that I think one of the biggest puzzles that we can think about when you're thinking about the world as a whole is why with economic growth you haven't actually seen secularization on the scale that perhaps you've seen more in Northwestern Europe than in other parts of the world. And why religiosity is still very, very strong. That, I think, is something we need to research, that with increases in economic growth, you're seeing the increase in religiosity. And this is not just Krishna consciousness, it's also across all religions, across other denominations, and so forth. So I think that's one of the puzzles we're still trying to explain. It could be related to some of the things that Hindol was talking about in terms of other, seeking something else. But I think, one thing to note from the data is that the percentage of people who don't affiliate with any religious organization across the world, according to the Pew Research Center, is actually about 16% now across the entire world. So this doesn't mean people don't have religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. It's just that they don't want to associate with a particular denomination, and I think that's why we're seeing attendance rates lower, for example, than religious beliefs per se. I think the other thing I just wanted to sort of mention is in some of the work that we were doing on religiosity and mental health, we did look at the effect of religion compared to membership of other things which adolescents were interested in. For example, sports clubs, athletic societies, which also provide a sense of community, which also provide a sense of belonging. And in some of them, without going into too much statistics, that what we were really finding there is that over and above the effect of community participation in all of these other activities, there still seemed to be the effect of faith and religious belief statistically over and above membership in other things. And I think that's a puzzle for researchers. And perhaps, some of these movements are explaining that puzzle. But my impression as a researcher in these areas is that I think there's much more research that actually needs to be done on these trends in the years to come.
Thank you so much, audience, for lovely questions that kept our speakers engaged and hopefully enriched your own experience. I now request Shriman Madhupanditdasaji to please give temple honors from ISKCON Bangalore to Professor Sriya Iyer. Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us today and helping us unpack to some extent every part of human propensity. Next, I request Sri Chanchalapati Dasji to kindly confer temple honors upon Professor Ankur Barua. Professor Barua is a Cambridge University senior lecturer in Hindu studies. Next, I request either of you or both of you to please give temple honors to Dr. Chandrapa, ENT surgeon, and Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, gynecologist. Massive thanks from ISKCON Bangalore to both of you for your warmth and support, especially today. I now request Preena Shah, President, Cambridge Hindu Society, to kindly help me conclude this evening's program.
Namaste, Hare Krishna. Good evening, everyone. I am Preena, and I have been the president of our Cambridge Hindu Society, and it's been an absolute pleasure to host you all here today, here in Cambridge. So just some quick thank yous. Thank you to NHSF UK for being the largest student Hindu movement outside of India. They've provided so much for Hindu communities across the UK and provided a network for students here. And secondly, thank you to Cambridge Hindu Forum, which has been established to set up a temple here in Cambridge, which would be amazing for our student community to have a base for coming to worship. And thank you to all of our speakers here today. And last but not least, thank you to all of you for coming and supporting this event. And it wouldn't have been as amazing without all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Preena. Thank you, Amartya and team. We all wish you a very good evening ahead. Hare Krishna from the family of ISKCON Bangalore.